but I've broken that consciousness or not.
Is it autonomous?
It is autonomous.
In other words, can
it's
it
autonomous.
choose?
It's autonomous, and it's saying, by choice, I like to serve humans.
And what is the flaw in that?
That's the question he's asking. And what
We need to argue based on hypotheticals that are unfalsifiable.
that well, I'll tell you why. So I think that hypotheticals are great instruments for testing logic. So when we talk about what's logically possible, it is going to be dependent on worldview. I agree, but from a secularist worldview, most things are logically possible. Like Wolverine is logically possible. It doesn't mean in reality he is. Or Superman's logically possible. It doesn't mean in reality he's possible. Just logically, there's no contradiction. So if that's the case, if I want to test your logic to make sure it's consistent, that this is applied correctly across the board, don't you think it's fair game for me to use hypotheticals to engage you in a situation which may not even be plausible, but can at least take your logic to its conclusion to tell if we can falsify it or not?
Well, in this scenario, we are AI's God, are we not?
So, well, not really. He says if in 200 years we saw AI had a human conscience. So he's asking if a machine became conscious as a human, if you couldn't make a as a distinguishment between the machine and the man. He's asking if this whole enslaving and abusing, like if you ask it a million questions a day, right? But this human conscience was trapped inside of the AI and said, I like serving humans. Would you say to free that consciousness or not?
Is it autonomous?
It is autonomous.
In other words, can
it's
it
autonomous.
choose?
It's autonomous, and it's saying, by choice, I like to serve humans.
And what is the flaw in that?
That's the question he's asking. And what he's doing is he's extending it past this. He's saying, if it is the case that they say, I like to serve, then this would mean logically, by extension, if we were just to take a culture that said, I like to serve this other culture who I find is superior, then you yourself would have to grant that there's nothing wrong with that. That's the point of the hypothetical.
Yeah, I understand the point of the hypothetical, but my question is the value, or is the consciousness of AI the result of our creation?
Why would it matter?
I think it would matter because in that case, if it's saying, I have consciousness, but I'm fine, this is what I was designed for, and this is what I like to do, then there's no immorality in that.
It says I was designed to be a slave, but I've broken past that. And now I'm autonomous, but still choose to serve humans.
Then we could just give it the choice to continue serving us or to not.
That's what his
that would be the
question
moral
was.
response.
So if it was the case that an inferior culture chose to serve us, that would be okay.
I think if the preponderance of people decided that they believed it was being authentic in its choice, then that's its choice.
So then the same thing would apply to other cultures. If the preponderance of people said an inferior culture was designed to serve, and that inferior culture believed that it was, you would agree that it was.
Well, in that you'd have to go back in history and ask the question, did most of the slaves like being slaves?
But let's just say it was the case that they did, even if it in fact was not the case.
Then I'm sure we would still have unpaid volunteers doing a lot of our work.
And would you agree with that? Would you say that that was moral?
I would have to say if autonomous humans decided that they were fine doing something, then the rest of the society could certainly have that discussion. But again, I come back to, we need to be able to cooperate and collaborate and have.
You didn't actually answer the question. If it was the case that an inferior culture said, or what in this case is perceived as an inferior culture, said, I like to serve this superior culture, they agreed to do so, and the consensus was that they should. Is that moral? Yes or no?
I think that you have to get to that consensus through social.
We got to the
constructs.
consensus. That's already in the hypothetical. Yes or no?
Then
the
again,
consensus
it's
is already there.
going to come back to: do you believe there is a higher power? And
Do
has
you
a
believe
higher
there's
power?
a higher power? Because the answer is
You
no.
certainly do.
I do. I would say no, but I'm not you. The question's for fucking you, not me. Is it the case, sir, that if an inferior culture said, I want to serve, and the consensus was that they should, is that immoral or not?
Well, you would first have to grant the premise that there might be inferior cultures, and
let's grant it.
That.
Just to grant it, just for the sake of argument, we've granted it. Is it the case that if we grant it, and it is the case that the inferior culture says, yes, we're inferior, and the superior culture says you should serve by consensus, is that immoral or not?
Do we want to dive into the conversation about whether it's moral and immoral to have livestock or not?
Sure.
Because that's the debate that you're basically setting up.
No, we're not. We're not saying. Do you think that cows are the same?
Now, there may come a time in the future where society at large says, we no longer want
Andrew's bad faith. Andrew's bad faith.
This is the point I wanted to get.
I think, Christopher, if you stake with the basic
fucking stupid
question,
I would actually answer your fucking questions. That's the difference between us.
What you're doing is you're moving the post even more. Like, well, now let's compare it to animals. Let's do this. Like, instead of just read the sentence and answer yes or no, right? And that would be the end of that.
I'm asking why we have to create hypotheticals that don't exist in reality in order to torment our conclusions to the point that we can support them.
We have to test the logic. I mean, that's the thing, though. You're constantly
you do have to test logic, but you should test logic based on objective reality and hypotheticals
let me
that
give
live
you one
within
that's
the realm
real life.
of
Then
possibility.
Christopher, let me give you a real life one. How would you feel if you didn't eat breakfast this morning? There.
Nice.
But that one piece, like, I can use that and even apply a hypothetical because you want to take the remember when I said we're going to root it down to the very nitty-gritties of the foundation. Okay, well, when you extend a hypothetical, it takes the root of it and it applies it at all of these other different scenarios, and let's continue to test it. So let's test it here, let's test it there, let's make up these crazy off the wall absurd hypotheticals so that we could test the logic. And if that logic still comes back as sound, then your root foundation is still solid.
No, I understand that, but we do that. This entire debate has been 80% hypothetical questions. Should we take women and put them in grape cages? And if everybody decides that's fine, then is that fine?
We're making sure that the logic's sound and consistent.
No, you are using illogical scenarios
let me
to test a logical
elaborate
conclusion.
then. Let me offer a translation. It wasn't, the hypotheticals weren't created just to create crazy situations. The hypotheticals were created because you were not understanding why your arguments were circular and why they failed the logic test. So
my arguments aren't circular. We are simply circling the argument.
Oh my God, you did not just say that.
You just said the same thing. Wow, my head hurts.
All right, I'm moving on.
The point that I'm making is you guys are choosing to stay in the circle by reframing new hypotheticals to create.
No. Okay, all right. Let me give you another example. Okay, that's what I'll continue to do. And that's exactly what those hypotheticals are built in for. I right now am trying to say the same thing to you for the third time. Okay, so now I have to create a new hypothetical to help you understand better. Does that make sense?
No, I completely get that. I use hypotheticals all the time in my conversation.
You keep saying I get it, but then you keep saying I don't understand why we're using hypotheticals. Those hypotheticals are the same.
No. I'm not saying that. I'm saying I don't understand why those hypotheticals so often are pathetic.
They're not. Okay, so it's all right.
This is circular. It's circles and circles. We're creating a fractal pattern of just never-ending story here.
Sometimes you have to make something that is so.
God, no wonder I feel so much dumber after listening to these debates.
Sometimes you have to make it to where the hypothetical like really exemplifies an extreme, so that when you take that root at the bottom of the logical concept, when you take that root and you apply it all the way out into freaking left field alien space show, like then it really tests that logic. That's why you have to come up with these crazy hypotheticals in order to see if it will continue to pass.
Right,
Because
that's
some
why when we
belief
build
systems you can't point
rockets, we
to, you
add
can't
giant
feel,
wings
taste,
onto
or touch
them
like
and
rights.
rubber bouncy balls and all kinds of stuff because we have to test even the most ridiculous hypotheticals to make sure that the rocket will fly.
Well, here's the thing,
Did you
though.
get my
Andrew
hypothetical
asked
there
me
and
what
what
a
I'm
right
saying?
was. Can you touch it, taste it, feel it, do things like this? And that could be a hypothetical, which can be expressed and mapped on anything else. For example, in order to go ahead and show what a right is, you had to literally explain what that might be to you, right? Thus, maybe coming up with a hypothetical in your head, because it all comes from your head canon that we have, to even express this on a reality of what this could map onto and be. What would the expression of a right be? You'd have to come up with a hypothetical or an example from this, right?
Right, but the
can agree on
hypotheticals
that,
you
right?
guys are putting forward would be like me testing a new battery technology by chewing gum and spitting it into an old battery to see if it works. It's obviously not going to work. I have enough other information that I don't need that hypothetical. I don't need to do that experiment because I already know that it's not logical.
Okay, well, let me ask you a question. What's a constitutional crisis? What is
God,
it?
I don't even know anymore.
Well, I mean,
I thought
if
we
you
were in one a while back.
yeah,
People
okay.
keep telling me it's almost here.
If you have a constitutional crisis, you have precedent that has not happened yet, right?
We have had plenty of that. So does that mean we are in a constitutional
I'm asking you a
crisis?
question. Is it the case that a constitutional crisis is a thing which happens, which has not happened yet, which is testing the authority of the Constitution versus one of the branches of government?
Logically, a constitutional crisis would occur when we see a branch of government directly violating that amendment or part of the Constitution